Hi, my name is Mehlenbacher.
Madison McCabe.
Jack Romat.
Ariana Parkinson.
Celine Houle.
It's Elizabeth McFarland-Porter.
Evan Deutsch.
Ashe Maynard.
Tanner Kuhn.
Jordan Potter.
Emily Petralia.
I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and unofficially I struggle with gender dysphoria.
Depression and anxiety.
Gender dysphoria and anxiety.
Depression and anxiety of different severities. And I've also been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Borderline personality disorder.
Anxiety, depression, and PTSD.
Dissociative identity disorder.
Anxiety, depression, and ADHD.
I struggle with anxiety and bouts of depression from time to time.
Anxiety, depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and am currently recovering from an eating disorder.
It started all in around 7th grade when problems started with me sleeping and getting more anxious, and it took a while for me to realize that things were getting quickly out of hand, and I always tried to keep it under control, but there was some point in my life where I just couldn't keep it all under wraps.
I always noticed that there was kind of something off, and I always felt a little bit different, and I wouldn't understand why things that upset me didn't upset other kids.
Yeah, that's just it. I when I got older and looked back, I realized it's something I've always had, but I didn't notice it until I was 22 or 23, somewhere around that. It was directly after college. I was living at home, I was directionless, and kind of had free time for the first time in my life. And I think it was with all that freed up brain space that the darker side of my mind just started to run with it.
So I think I've been aware of my mental health since probably 6th grade, but I didn't have an understanding of it until maybe 8th grade, because my mom also has anxiety. So she basically told me the symptoms, and basically what you're experiencing is anxiety. And I think I finally fully understood what anxiety looked like to me, maybe 10th grade.
I've been aware of my mental health since maybe middle school. Come puberty, I realized I wasn't quite like my peers. I was just sort of the ugly duckling in the corner that didn't quite know how to fit in with the idea of femininity. So I guess it was there that I first realized that I was maybe not comfortable in my own skin, and I'd never quite figured out why until much later.
The thing that got me to notice my mental health first was in high school. I had a friend who struggled with depression, OCD, and anxiety as well. He had a really rough go of things. He was also gay, and his friends were very immature about it, and they stopped spending time with him, hanging out with him. A couple of them actually started bullying him, and I was the only person that stayed friends with him during that really rough time of his life. And I didn't really understand that being around that without taking care of yourself can be really damaging. And it wasn't until a few years later that I started to realize and notice all of the signs of my own depression and anxiety. Once I did, I had resources to use to get into therapy, and I had developed some more friends at that point, but there was still the depression and anxiety that came along with it.
It would all start when my parents divorced at 4 years old. You'll hear a lot of studies that say that divorced children struggle with abandonment issues and trust issues and on and on and on, and I am the embodiment of that. But on top of that, if your parents don't support each other, don't like each other, and portray each other in a negative light, it's even harder with intimacy and feeling close to somebody, because your entire life you've been told that the two people you love most are are monsters, even though they're not. It's a perception from both of your parents' view, but to feel that loving somebody is wrong when it's your own birth giver is a very traumatic experience. So that point really started my journey in struggling with intimacy, struggling with being close to somebody, trusting somebody, because I was told that both my parents are, you know, bad people from my other parent, which is entirely confusing. And then after my parents' divorce, my father especially was very hard on me, and my mother was very controlling. So they had joint custody, and between two parents, there were two different parenting styles. So if you could imagine being raised by two completely different parents and two completely different, you know, belief systems, that was my biggest issue in forming who I am, and that's why I really struggle with the personality disorder, because I was really raised to be two different people. And from then on, I have had issues.
My depression and anxiety stem from some pretty serious childhood abuse. My ADHD, my brain's just wired differently, and it didn't really come to a head until I was in about, I don't know, 4th, 5th grade, when my grades started dropping because I couldn't focus in class.
I guess, like, as a kid, you don't really care about mental health all that much because you don't have many problems. But then as your teenage years start growing, anxiety just kind of popped into your head, and I didn't really know what it was, but I knew it was there. And then throughout high school and college, I also knew it was there and dealt with it in the best way that I knew how. And I don't know how to describe that, but it was just like relying on friends and compartmentalizing with myself, I suppose, and dealing with whatever came up.
So I would say that my mental health has always been a bit rocky. Ever since I was a child, I was a really anxious kid. I was always worried about something or another, whether it was school or coming home to my parents or talking to my parents. And I would say that it was probably around middle school that I became very aware of my mental health. I used to come home just, you know, in tears. I didn't want to go to school. I would say that one of the more significant events that affected my mental health at this time was my best friend, who I was pretty much joined at the hip with, had to move away to a different state because her mom had committed suicide. So I had to deal with my best friend being away when I was 11 and she was 10, and it was traumatic for both of us and in different ways, of course. But I had to deal with just adjusting at school and at home. And I would say that it only really went downhill from there. Different events in my life took place, which led into, you know, new eras, I guess, so to speak, of my mental health and where it stood.
I think there were a couple of events that kind of led up to my mental health kind of really crashing and me having to be aware of it. My sophomore year of high school, at the end of my freshman year, my papa died, which was really hard on me. And then end of freshman, beginning of sophomore year, I became really isolated. A lot of my friends, well, people I thought were my friends, stopped talking to me, which like made me feel like, you know, crap. And I think that, along with with how a teacher mistreated me, kind of all led up to a big boom of it.
My mental health affects my school life, my work life, and my social life, pretty much all aspects of my life. I know that for school it's very difficult because I am in the performing arts, and so with recovering from an eating disorder, sometimes it can be competitive because if you don't fit into the costume that someone has made for the part, like, you don't get the part, and it's harsh and it's wrong, but that's the reality of the music business and all that stuff.
To live day to day with gender dysphoria and anxiety, it's it's hit or miss depending on the day. Some days I can feel on top of the world. I can feel really at home with myself. And other days I can't stand myself and I just don't want to do anything about it. Like, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to see myself.
Living day to day, it's a lot of little things that add up to a lot of big things. There are some days that I will be scared to leave my boyfriend's dorm to go to the bathroom because I feel there will be people in the hallway. There's only 6 people that are with me in school, and they are wonderful people. I love them beyond words. But sometimes they will ask me, do you want to come to the grad lounge and study? Do you want to practice with me? Do you want to do this or that with me to prepare for our next test, our next administration, whatever it may be? And I will say it's okay, and then I will overthink the situation for hours on end, and I will feel like I don't want to be here. I don't think I can leave the house to do that. I don't think I have the energy to go do that. I mean, I even experienced that today doing a simple interview.
So my anxiety and depression affects my social life and just my life in general by making me very stay at home. Like, I really enjoy being alone. I can't have plans thrown on me. I basically have to know in advance if we're going to be doing something. I can't have social situations sprung on me. Depression comes and goes. It's definitely up and down, but anxiety never really goes away. I can't be home alone. I won't sleep. I have to take anxiety sleeping medication to sleep at home alone. Also, it's a lot of like racing heart. My face gets really red when I have anxiety, and a lot of people mistake it for being embarrassed, which makes me embarrassed because they stare at me, and it's just this like vicious cycle of being super uncomfortable.
Well, I mean, I am medicated. Have been for, on and off for a few years, but I've been solidly medicated for a year, and that makes a absolute world of difference. It makes the anxiety manageable, and it makes the depression manageable. I mean, the OCD's manageable too, but it's the one that the meds help with the least, and it's the one that's the most intrusive into my life, most consistently intrusive. I mean, when the anxiety or the depression gets bad, that's like number one. That's all I can think about. That's what's really running the show. But the OCD is always there under the surface. It's, washing my hands all the time because I work in food service. It's getting home and disinfecting my phone and my car keys before I can do anything. It's not being able to relax sometimes until I've like absolutely cleaned something. It's mostly germophobia, but it manifests in other ways as well.
I would say that when I open myself up to other people about my mental health, I normally don't do so very easily. I do it with people that I trust, and that trust, usually comes with time. I don't usually open up my conversations with, hello, my name is Ariana Parkinson and I have crippling anxiety. That's not usually what I do. So I trust certain people with getting into my head as far as those things go. There are some people that marginalize what I'm going through. I've met people that act like what I'm going through isn't too bad because maybe it's not as severe as what they experienced, and they kind of dismiss it. A lot of the time, people are under the impression of like, oh, well, like you handle it so well though. But something that's difficult for me personally to kind of come to terms with is that I handle my trauma pretty well, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect me any less than other people. I may on the outside look like I have it kind of under wraps, but that's not necessarily the case. And I found that because of how well hidden that me or plenty of other people can keep it, people are less likely to believe you or basically, give you the respect that you may deserve for going through these mental issues every day.
Well, I think people kind of understand that mental health it affects everybody, so they're pretty understanding of that. Plus, a lot of my friends are actually going into the mental health field to help people. So my circle of friends is pretty, like, you know, they're very helpful and supportive as opposed to some other people, I suppose.
Astonishingly, I find that more people are accepting and understanding of the anxiety and depression because it seems to be almost a pervasive set of mental illnesses in my generation. But the ADHD, people are just like, oh, that means you can't focus, or oh, that means you're scatterbrained. Or I had one person tell me that ADHD is actually classified on the autism spectrum, and that it is true, it's actually classified on the autism spectrum on like one of the very far ends, but that it meant that I needed extensive therapy and that I wasn't dealing with my life correctly or how I should be coping. So I find that the ADHD is actually what garners me a lot more disapproval than either of the other ones.
People tend to be real curious about dissociative identity disorder because it's not necessarily common. It's very difficult for people to come and understand where I'm coming from, and it makes it difficult to try and relate to other people when talking about it. And I always try to make sure that I explain everything in the best detail as possible, but most of the time it's hit or miss.
I would say most people are very supportive and really try to help me when I open up to them about my mental health problems. I had to email all of my professors about my mental health problems because it caused me to miss a lot of classes, more than I typically miss. And they were all very understanding. You know, they all said, you just do what you gotta do, take care of yourself, we'll catch you up when, you know, you're ready to be caught up. And I think it's very similar with my friends as well. They're all very understanding. Of course, it helps them. Most of my friends also suffer from mental health problems. So we're kind of all there to support each other in our depressive episodes. And, you know, whenever one of us is having a mental health crisis, you know, including me, my friends are there to help.
My depression and anxiety affect my work ethic a lot. Not so much that I'm a bad worker or anything like that, but that I have lower motivation. I have less of a threshold for handling certain circumstances. I procrastinate a lot because of my depression and anxiety, which ends up not working out well for me because the more things I have to do last minute, the more anxious I get. I've gradually been getting better with both. That's mainly because I've begun to understand what my thresholds are and what I need to do to combat the dip into depression and anxiety.
I compare my mental illnesses to other people's all the time, especially when it comes to eating disorders. That's one of the biggest things that you do. I'll look at someone struggling with, say, anorexia who may be significantly thinner than I am, and I'll think, oh, well, I can't have an eating disorder because I'm not skinny, so I'm faking it and I'm not bad enough to get help, so these behaviors are fine. When in reality, I've been hospitalized before because of it, because I thought that I wasn't that bad and because I wasn't receiving the help that I needed. And when it comes to the post-traumatic stress disorder, it's really hard because sometimes I'll think that, oh, well, some people have gone through so many worse situations and have endured such greater trauma than I have, so I feel like I must not have post-traumatic stress disorder and I just am having trouble moving on or something like that. When in reality, I have constant reoccurring nightmares and it's very hard for me to stop thinking about the things that have happened to me, and it causes me a great amount of discomfort and anger a lot of the time.
I constantly am judging myself and beating myself up because of my mental health, fully because I don't think I really accept it. I do always think that people have it so much worse than me, and I have no reason to feel the ways that I'm feeling because they're not rational and they're not justifiable. And I think for me that's like the hardest thing about living with it, is just because when I have a mental breakdown, when I have an anxiety attack, when I have a depressive episode, I just beat myself up over it, which just makes it worse. I get in denial that I'm having one. I isolate myself. Yeah, for me, that's probably the hardest part about living with my depression, my anxiety, and my PTSD.
So I do have trouble comparing my mental health to other people. I've struggled with it since high school and even more in college, since I've met people that have gone through harder things than I have, people who've had much harder backgrounds, family lives, experiences such as assaults and stuff like that, and I've struggled more with less, and it's hard to understand when you're in a depressed or anxious state that your threshold is different than other people's, and it's okay that you're struggling more with something less. But I do struggle with it frequently.
So I never sought any professional help from any mental health professionals, although I did consider it. But over time, at least now, I feel like my anxiety is something that I can deal with myself. And while that may be foolhardy of me, I still feel like I can deal with it and compartmentalize it. Mostly because a lot of my stress comes from financials and from work, which are two things that I deal with every day and that will always get better with time. So that's my outlook on it for professional help. And then with approaching friends for help, I generally rely on my friends for a lot of support. I feel like everybody does. So whenever I have a problem, I usually just tell them and we're able to work something out.
I have reached out for help for gender dysphoria, but I have not yet done anything about my anxiety. It is a pressing issue. It just doesn't seem as pressing as other things at the time. For my gender dysphoria diagnosis, I actually went to a mental health counselor, and they were able to help guide me through the entire transitional process after I kind of checked all their boxes saying that I was, hey, you're trans, that's cool. And they were able to help, but a lot of the resources were spread out just because it's a rural area.
I've never actually sought proper counseling. I mean, I've pursued it in the past, but never to the point of actually getting counseling or therapy. I do think it would probably help, but while I'm medicated, I usually feel okay. While I'm medicated, I feel like I can get through. I mean, I'm better now than I'm probably better now than I have been at any other point in the past few years. And so, honestly, right now, I feel pretty good.
I have all of the tools to get help for mental health. I just don't take advantage of those tools. 2 years ago, I was a freshman in college, and my mental health was really struggling to the point that a family member actually told me that I had to go. And she lives in California, and she basically said, I know a friend who's at SUNY Plattsburgh's counseling facility, and she's expecting you to call. And I knew I needed to, and I went, and it did help for the 3 or 4 times I went, but then I stopped going, and then I could feel myself a few months later getting worse, so I sought help on my own, and I went 3 times. I cried all 3 times, and I was like, this is not for me. Even though that means it's working, I have this fear of coming off as weak and vulnerable, so I wish I could go to mental health counseling again, but I just don't know if I'm ready to like be in a room with somebody and be vulnerable for an hour.
So I refused help for many, many years. It took me until I was 18 years old to actually start talking to my parents about how I've been feeling different ever since I was little, really start talking about the abuse that I endured from a friend when I was younger, and start explaining my obsessions, my compulsions, my eating habits. And once I told my parents, they are kind of the ones that encouraged me to get help. And I started seeing a therapist from home who really wasn't the best. We didn't really click all that well. But then once I came to Crane at SUNY Potsdam, the counseling center has been phenomenal. And I'm currently working with someone who I really vibe with and who has helped me make significant strides to heal and recover from everything. So I am currently on medication for my obsessive compulsive disorder and for eating disorder treatment for my body dysmorphia. And I feel like there's a big stigma around medication and whether or not you should take it. And it's not for everybody. Like, some people choose not to take it and they find other ways to cope and it helps them. But it's not as scary as it sounds. And yeah, it might take a while before you can find the medication that works best for you. Luckily for me, the first medication I was put on worked perfectly, but it can be so beneficial. Like, I can't imagine my life now without medication, and I'm really grateful for it because I know now that I'll never be as bad as I once was before, and it's kind of like a new life. It's like wearing rose-colored glasses in a way. Like, for me, I just see everything in a much more positive way, and I have so much more energy.
I first went to therapy when I was 17 years old. It was court mandated. I really, really did not want to go because I thought to myself, I just lived through all of this horrible stuff. The last thing I want to do is to go and like be forced to relive it all. But it helped me in the long run, absolutely, to deal with that trauma, process it in a healthy, relatively controlled way. Then if I was to let it build, maybe like learn unhealthy coping mechanisms from it. And over time, I learned to really appreciate therapy for what it was. And I still go. I've been going for, I want to say 6 years now. And I've had several different therapists. And what I can say about having several different therapists is that the initial part of having to explain yourself, explain your story, that part really sucks. It's kind of exhausting, but I've learned that each new therapist has a different piece that they can learn from your story and kind of retell it back to you in a way that makes sense. Like, you deal with things this way because of XYZ, learning to make connections and kind of like learn to understand that you're doing certain things because they helped you at one point in time or another. They served a purpose, all of it, but they don't necessarily serve a purpose anymore. So it might be like learning to break tradition, to break habit, like those cognitive pathways that have been so beaten down, where your brain just automatically thinks a certain way. So it's kind of breaking that programming and reprogramming it into thinking a different way. A more helpful way is what they call it. And I also have been going to a psychiatrist for several years now. And I found that medication does help a lot. Medication is tricky though, because it all is so different. Everybody's brain chemistry is so different. It's hard to predict how certain medications will affect you when they're all so similar and yet so chemically different at the same time. But it's a lot of trial and error. And once you find that perfect combination that works for you, it gives you the tools to really work on what you need to work on. It gives you that mental stability that you might be lacking otherwise.
To keep my mental health in check, I kind of just do whatever makes me feel most authentically me. Just doing things that make me feel like I fit in, I guess. I do live with a lot of animals that could be a form of emotional support. I have two cats and a dog, and our housemate has a cat as well, so it definitely keeps it friendly in the house.
I used to have a lot of bad coping mechanisms. I used to dabble in some drugs to try and escape from what I have. I tried to run away from my problems or flat out ignore that they exist. However, over the years, I started developing more positive and healthier coping mechanisms like therapy, working out, and trying to discuss all of my problems with my friends and family.
I find that keeping a good support network around me helps a lot. I do have a cat. He's not a registered emotional support animal, but he might as well be. He can sense when I'm having an anxiety attack, and he just lays on my chest until I start breathing normally again. But for the most part, just keeping a calm environment, keeping a clean environment if I can, not letting the toxicity of my outside world affect the normalcy of my inside world. I keep my home life and my outside life very, very separate from each other, because if I don't, my mental space is just going to get all screwed up, in between the two.
It's hard for me because I did study psychology, so it's almost like a magician knowing all the tricks of the trade and then being told to be different. But I do believe in some coping mechanisms. A simple one is breathing. Your brain has a fight or flight response, so especially with anxiety, if you're getting riled up, that is your adrenaline and your cortisone running through your body and being like, it's time to attack, it's time to feel nervous and scared. Simply breathing for 10 seconds straight will deactivate that system and let you think clearly. So my favorite is starfish breathing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the exhale. And we do that through all of our fingers, and by the end of it, you're pretty calm. Other than that, my main coping mechanism would be alone time. There's been times where my darling family and my boyfriend will come in and try to talk to me, and I have what we call sensory overload, which means my anxiety is making every noise 10 times louder, every problem 10 times bigger, and everything 10 times scarier. So having something in your brain rattling around like that, if somebody's coming in and talking to you about their day even, it's going to seem like too much. So there will be times where I'll say, I need 5 minutes. I need to be left alone. I need you to not talk to me. And I will think through my issues. I will write myself, and then I will continue on. There's no shame in taking a pause from life for even 5 minutes to let your brain, recharge, recircuit, and, do better, honestly.
So to help with my mental health, I am lucky that both my housemates that I live with when I'm at college both also suffer from mental health, and they both have a support kitties. So I live with 2 emotional support kitties, which even though they're not mine, they have helped me a lot because animals are magical in that way. And I've definitely done a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms to cope with my mental health. The biggest probably being ignoring it, thinking that could work. And as well as some healthy coping mechanisms that I found, hanging out with friends. An unhealthy coping mechanism that I do is isolating myself. So it's kind of funny that a healthy coping mechanism for me is hanging out with 1 or 2 friends. I also try to do meditation. Though I am so bad at keeping up with it, as well as just other small general things just to help me calm down, as well as, you know, I try to keep a positive outlook on life. It can be hard, but that is something that I try, and when I succeed in keeping a positive outlook on life, that typically helps as well. My most common coping mechanism that I do is picking my nails. I'm doing it right now. I do it pretty much whenever I feel like anxious or nervous or anything. It's because I need a fidget, and it's an easy thing to fidget with.
Yeah, I keep my mental health in check and at a good level by eating right and exercising. And it's like the most basic thing you can do. And actually, when I did seek help, they put me on a medication, and I don't like medication. So he's like, how about we try the natural route? And that was really nice because I feel like right now they're really pushing meds on people. So I just started getting good sleep. I take melatonin, so I sleep all night, and I eat well and exercise so I can just feel good. Coping mechanisms, I feel like my coping mechanisms aren't bad, but I notice when I'm anxious, I pinch back to my hands, I bite my lips and my cheeks, I do the leg bounce, but I don't feel like I have any bad coping mechanisms other than probably oversleeping. And he's not like a certified therapy dog, but I do have a therapy dog to me. He is my boyfriend's dog, and when I moved in, around the time that I moved in, my dog had to be put down, and the day after I went to the bathroom and he followed me in, and from that moment he was just my dog, and he's a rescue, so he was rehomed twice, so I feel like we just get each other, so he's really helpful.
Hello, I'm Mike from IXL Health and Fitness in Rhinebeck. I'm also an online trainer at Mike's Method Fitness. I'm here to talk about how exercise can benefit your mental health. All right, so first off, exercise helps out with your mental health by boosting your confidence. With exercise, you learn how to control your body and movements as you move through space, and it also helps you look better and look a little bit bigger, better posture, and more confident, carried look. Also, exercise helps chemically by improving your mental health by releasing endorphins and serotonin into your brain, which is kind of what improves your mood, keeps you happy, keeps you feeling good and energized throughout the day. Also, exercise helps increase blood flow to the brain, which is important for making new neural connections, helping with your memory, also helping with your mood as well, keeping you bright and energized during the day. Also to help with your mental health, recommended exercises, about 30 minutes a day for 5 or 6 days a week. So try to get that in, and if you keep that up regularly, it'll help reduce your stress and also help with symptoms of certain mental disorders like depression, anxiety, and other things like that. Really help improving your mood, again, improving your mental health. And a lot of people think that exercise is expensive. You have to join a gym, you have to hire a personal trainer, you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month or year on equipment, and again, time in the gym. Actually, all you need, like I said, is 5 to 6 days, 30 minutes of moderate to intense exercise, and you can do that anywhere where you have space to move your own body around. It could be your living room, your bathroom, your kitchen, anywhere where you have space. Also, there's plenty of public parks around to give you access to free equipment, such as the playground right behind me here. Tons of stuff you can do, even as an adult, and have fun with it. And for those with anxiety or even just general nervousness, to get started, you can start working out at home to practice through the movements. YouTube, Google, and plenty of other places, such as online trainers, offer a cheap or free way to get started, to kind of get prepped before you go into the gym, so you don't have to worry about embarrassing yourself. And even if you really want to get into the gym to use that cool equipment, but you're a little bit nervous, don't worry. Most people are either looking at themselves in the mirror or focused on what they're doing, so they're not going to judge you. So a couple exercises you can do at home or out in public and stuff like that is, if you have access to something to do pull-up bar, you can start with that, or even kind of assisted pull-ups, negative pull-ups, kind of different ways. And if you don't have access to that, there's easily push-ups or inclined push-ups. If you can't quite do a push-up on the floor, you can just raise your hands up a little bit higher on like a table or a counter in your house, and that way it'll make it a lot easier. Also, planks, crunches, sit-ups, and a bunch of floor exercises you can do really anywhere, even if you don't have the space. And also, most people have steps in their home or steps at the local park, so you can climb up and down stairs either on all fours or just on your legs, or doing step-ups, squats, lunges, or a bunch of other exercises for your legs. And that'll really get your heart rate up and really help burn calories if your goal is to try to lose weight.
I do have some advice for some people that are going through some stuff, because everybody does. And you're not alone here. Everybody deals with it. There's 7 billion people on the planet. One mistake that you make is not going to be the end of the world. That's something I have to remind myself, especially with the profession that I chose, where everything kind of has to be perfect. With photo, video, literally everything has to look good and sound good. Otherwise, you can't use it. So just because you make a mistake, try to learn from it and see what you can glean, and then either how to prevent it or improve upon it in the future. That's kind of how I would go about that.
My biggest word of advice would be, don't isolate yourself. It's so easy to do. I've mentioned it multiple times that it's something I do a lot, but it really just makes it worse. And for me, one of the reasons I isolate myself is because, so my friends don't have to worry about me, but I'm gonna let you in on a secret. They're gonna worry about you anyway, probably even more if you isolate yourself. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice. And just, try to talk about it with people. I think that's been the thing that's helped me the most, because the more you talk about it, the more you realize so many people struggle with these problems. And then you kind of find yourself in a community of support with people who understand what you're going through. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me. Also, seek medical help, whether it is medication, therapy, or anything.
I wouldn't have gotten through it without the support of the people I love. There's just no way I could have done it alone. It's a matter of when you're in the depths of anxiety or depression, things just don't make sense the way they otherwise should. You need someone on the outside looking in who can tell you that it's gonna be okay, that your fears are irrational. Even if you don't believe them, sometimes just hearing that from someone you absolutely trust can make a world of difference. It can be like a mantra. They say it's okay, it's gonna be okay. Also, if you need medication, take medication. There's no shame in it. I am so happy that I found it, because it makes life bearable.
I would highly recommend seeking therapy. I know that's not an option for a lot of people, because they either don't have the correct type of insurance, they don't make enough money. I have no idea all of the types of circumstances that can bar you from therapy, but I do know there are a lot. So there are things that I would recommend that some people might not be able to get. And if that's the case, I would recommend finding friends, acquaintances, parental units, anyone that you trust and respect to lean on. Trust me when I say that the people you're talking to, if you have depression especially, I know that a common thought that runs through your head is that you're a burden to other people. You're not. I cannot tell you how many times I've started to lean on a friend and drawn back, and they ask me why. They always want to know what's going on with me. They always check back in with me whenever I draw away from them while we're in a person, like a one-on-one conversation in person. They notice, they ask, they don't want me to draw back like that. And I know that it can be really hard to overcome that mental obstacle, but it's best for everyone if you pull through it. I know that with anxiety, it's a lot of energy. It can sometimes feel like a drain of energy, like you're so anxious you can't do anything, and then at other times it's like you have so much anxiety you have to do something physically, written, whatever. You have to do whatever you can to get that out, and talk to people about how you're feeling, because sometimes it's social, sometimes it's certain types of situations, and letting people you know that are around you often know what the signs are, what ways to decrease your anxiety will help, so you don't have to put it all on you. You can ask other people to help you as well. And the last thing that I'm not clinically diagnosed with, but I do have, is gender dysphoria. It's probably the most difficult thing for me to speak to. It's the one that I've realized most recently in terms of everything that I've realized with my mental health. It's a very different experience for everyone with it. It takes all different types of forms and magnitude. I don't know how best to tell you to seek help. A lot of it is medical and a lot of it's unattainable for so many people. But just be safe about it. There are a whole bunch of ways that you can decrease your dysphoria without damaging your body physically, and it's best to research those methods to make sure that while you might be struggling mentally, you're not damaging yourself physically. And that's something I probably would have done if I didn't have the correct resources at the time. So there are a whole bunch of circumstances that I know people are in. Find the thing that works best for you, the thing that you're able to do, and commit to it. It helps a lot.
End the stigma that you are your diagnosis. I am currently a grad student at SUNY Plattsburgh, and I have a 3.74 GPA, something I'm very proud of, and that GPA comes along with 2 internships and a job and every other social event, social interaction that is required of me to do on top of that. It's a lot for somebody with my diagnosis, but it's something that I have thrived at. The reason being that I am not only a diagnosis, I am not only what people tell me I am on paper. If you feel that you are losing yourself, that you are becoming too much for your own bearing, there's no shame in getting help. There's no shame in finding a diagnosis. It might help you realize what's wrong and realize how to fix it. My diagnosis is not permanent. It's something that I can work through and I can ultimately fix, because it is PTSD symptoms and it is something that can be worked through. So there's no shame in finding help, and there's no shame in, becoming what you're going to be, even if it's a rougher road than everybody else takes. You are not your diagnosis. You are just you with extra obstacles.
Advice that I would give is that no one is gonna think you're crazy if you go and reach out for help, because the main reason why I didn't reach out for help is because with the obsessions and compulsions, I thought that I was insane, and I thought that there's no one out there that thinks like me, no one else is like this, I'm just crazy. But that's not the case. There are so many people going through things, and that's not, it's hard because I want to say that everybody is unique in their own way, but I'm not saying that, you're not special, you know what I mean? But it's kind of thank God you're not special. Thank God that there's other people going through what you're going through.
You are not alone, and there are many people out there who understand where you're coming from and willing to listen to you and give you a chance as to your mental health.
My advice for anyone struggling with mental health would be, 1, it's a controversial topic, but I don't believe in, they're your family anyway. People who are not good for you are not good for you, And that's just that. I've definitely cut family members out of my life, and I feel like a much better person now, and I will stand by that forever. I think you should also, it's uncomfortable, it's super uncomfortable, but you have to reevaluate who you're spending your time with. If you feel a certain way when somebody walks in a room, or the whole vibe changes when one of your friends walks in, maybe they're not helping you, and maybe they're kind of holding you back in this really dark place. And it's not really a conversation you want to have, and you don't really even have to have it. You could just fizzle out, but that's something you have to check if you want to get better and grow. And I know I should take my own advice, but mental health counseling is really, really good. I'll get there, but it's so beneficial, and I'm such an advocate for it. I just have my own things I don't like to tell random people. But if you have access to it on your college campus or through insurance, then you should definitely do it because it does help.
Reach out if you can. If you can't, just try and look up some resources. I know that places, different mental health organizations have lists of websites that you can view. I don't recommend self-diagnosing, but if you can't go to a therapist or if you can't go to a doctor for personal or safety reasons, self-diagnosing can help you, because even if it's not correct, you might find coping mechanisms that help you. And don't be afraid to acknowledge the fact that this is happening to you. The worst thing you can do with depression is tell yourself that you don't have it or that it's not that bad, because that's how it gets that bad.
For those struggling with anxiety, I have I have nothing for you, unfortunately. I hardly know how to manage it myself some days. But in terms of gender dysphoria, mostly just find your support group, find people who accept you for who you are, and do what makes you feel authentically you.
So my advice for women who want to feel confident, or they just are not used to standing up for themselves, would be, it's super cliche, but just do it. Like, you shouldn't feel bad about standing up for yourself just because you're a woman. Like, when a man stands up for himself, it's seen as powerful, but when a woman does, you're seen as a bitch. And I just don't think that's fair. I do it because I know at the end of the day that I'm not just doing it for myself. I'm doing it because I want my cousins to feel like they can stand up for themselves. I want my friends to feel like they can stand up for themselves. And all in all, it's not fair that you're willing to maybe even worsen your mental health because you won't have a conversation with somebody, or you won't say, hey, please stop doing that, I don't like that. So I always say, do it. Stand up for yourself, protect yourself, and just let people know that you're a person, basically. It's a human right to not be, violated or whatever. Just be blunt, like I am.
Yeah, standing up for yourself is definitely a tricky topic. As I said before off screen, my psychiatrist said the whole reason that I feel so low self-esteem and low respect for myself is because I don't stand up for myself. So if somebody is really truly being nasty to you, it's not that you need to be nasty. It's that you need to say, that's not okay with me, and respect yourself enough to be like, hold up, you need to understand that you need to respect me as an individual just like I respect everybody with ultimate certainty. And I guess standing up for yourself really takes putting into perspective that you do matter enough to say, I'm not okay with this. So you really need to understand that you're worth it. And even if you don't, give it a try and try to understand that even if it feels like you're being nasty, you're really respecting yourself on a level you might not understand yet, but it is important.